Welcome back to the Illinois Broadband Lab series, co-hosted by Illinois Office of Broadband, U of I System, U of I Extension, and Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. We're happy to welcome Matt Schmidt, Deputy Director for Broadband within the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and Shabika Agarwal, Illinois Broadband Lab Coordinator and Mapping Expert today. These tools have been so helpful for community planning, and we're grateful for today's update and overview. So let me go ahead and pass it to Matt now, and we're very grateful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Nancy, and to you and your colleagues at University of Illinois Extension. I say this every time, but we couldn't do this without you. Today, we're excited for the next installment of our summer webinar series. We've had two tracks focusing on basically how to take a state grant, how to be an applicant, how to get it right after the grant is made. And so there's great resources available. You're curating, Nancy and colleagues at the University of Extension can link right to that from our Office of Broadband Connect Illinois website. We also have a second track that's helping local governments, community stakeholders, and others make sense of the broadband opportunity, the digital equity opportunity in front of us all right now. So great content that's online. Today's session, of course, is focused on mapping, and this isn't the first webinar that we've had this year on mapping. We really look forward to digging into some of the information regarding updates on the Illinois broadband map. Shabika, in a moment, will take you through a demo and showing you some of those updates that have been made, not just talking about them, but showing them to you. We have some updates regarding Connect Illinois Round 3, specifically deadlines coming up and past, as well as updates with our mapping review process that's taking place right now. And then we also have a preview of how we're thinking about approaching round 4 of the Connect Illinois program. Of course, round 4 is how we're going to use our $1 billion in broadband equity access and deployment funds, the BEAD program, in the years ahead. And so, of course, throughout the conversation today, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to be active in the chat box, upload any questions that you have. And certainly by the time that we're done today, we hope that we're able to address all questions. And I do want to just emphasize, kind of going into this webinar, there's going to be a lot more attention to mapping in the coming weeks and months. I think you look at round 4 of Connect Illinois and those BEAD funds, as well as the work that we're doing currently with round 3 in Connect Illinois. Changes to our map, changes to the federal map. Mapping is going to be as important as ever. And so look forward to additional webinars, as well as some supporting, I think, resources that we're able to perhaps establish a community of practice, ways in which we can support those of you who would like to engage with us outside of the typical webinar format. And so stay tuned and feel free to also put forward any recommendations that you might have. And so with that said, I look forward to passing the mic over to my colleague, Shabika Agarwal with the Illinois Broadband Lab, Illinois' expert on broadband mapping. Shabika, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Matt mentioned, a great sort of overview there with broadband and mapping. And today, starting off with updates that we've made to the Illinois broadband map. I'm going to advance to the next slide here. So whenever we talk about mapping, we start with this. We work with our partner, Connected Nation, at the state to basically help put together the Illinois broadband map, a screenshot of which you're seeing to the right. We have a link to the map as well, and we'll be sharing that in the chat so that you have access to it. We released our first set of maps in June 2021, since we've been updating every 6 months. And the most recent update was actually in June. And we had our ISP outreach in March and May this year to actually collect data from providers about their service areas in the state. So there have been quite a few changes, and I'm sure people who've been tracking and looking at the map are kind of aware, and we appreciate your patience through us, working through the changes. So transition and data representation, essentially, we have been planning on transitioning from the state's granular polygon representation of service areas to a more the FCC's broadband serviceable locations data set. So as we were going through our outreach this round, we received data from providers in the form of polygons, which has been sort of the way that we were doing it so far. But then we also received data from some based on the locations. So we initially planned on representing the location data on the map, but what we realized was that it kind of there could be confusion with the FCC map as well, just because the data collection timelines for the two maps are pretty different. And because the FCC has a more robust challenge process in place to accept like availability challenges, what we decided for this round was basically to aggregate the state data into hex pins to avoid any confusion between the two, the state and the FCC maps. And meanwhile, we continue to like compare the two just to investigate any updates or differences that are being reported to the FCC and to the state. And again, the intention is to continue to ensure the accuracy of the maps. So we'll be talking more about what these hex pins are, but just want to again, it's going to be somewhat incorporated in the BEAD sub-grantee process moving forward as well. So, getting used to it might be a good idea at this point in time. The other thing is also that we, ISPs should soon have licensing, which would make sharing location data easier for the state and federal broadband programs. That's also why we did not essentially transfer to the location data at this point, because not all service providers have, that sort of easier like tier D licensing that would ease the transfer of information between the state and the ISPs. We continue to work for our CPF grants and BEAD funding so that we get to the granular data. We had been accepting shape files and project areas so far, but all of that information would now we have to convert it to the broadband serviceable locations. So we've been working with our round 1 and 2 grantees and also round 3 applicants to get that granular data. So what we would suggest here, if you're an ISP, definitely stay current on your CostQuest Fabric licenses so that this process is just going to make it easier if that's happening. So moving on to the hex pins, what actually this is, it's based on the H3 system, which is a global grid indexing system that was developed by Uber. So it basically divides the Earth's surface into standard identifiable grid cells. And on the picture on the right, we can basically see how there's different resolutions. Basically, it's available in 16 different resolutions, meaning the size of the hexagon basically changes with different resolutions. The hex pins that we have currently used on the Illinois broadband map are essentially resolution 6 and resolution 9. The resolution 6, basically one hexagon covers nearly 14 square miles of area, and then resolution 9 being a little more granular, which only covers like 0.04 square miles of area as part of the hexagon. Here is again like a visual representation of the different resolutions available and what that would look like. We've also carried out some analysis based on the FCC mapping data to get a sense of how many unserved and underserved locations based on the current like December 2022 release of FCC maps, how many unserved and underserved locations on average would fall within these different sizes of hexagons. So if you were to use the hexagon 6, resolution 6, which would be nearly 14 square miles of area in the hexagon, that would be nearly 91 unserved and underserved locations per hexagon. If we go on to resolution 7, which again is more granular with nearly 2 square miles of area, that would reduce the number to nearly 15 unserved or underserved locations per hexagon. And with a more finer sort of resolution with hexagon 8, that'd be nearly 6 per hexagon. So again, this is just an analysis. And again, this is going to play into how the BEAD process is going to look like, and we'll preview that towards the end as well. So just a little more data there about how these different sizes kind of compare with the unserved and underserved locations in the state. Moving on to the process of data aggregation into hex pins, just because this might be a little different. If you've used the FCC maps on the provider side, if you select a provider, you can actually see their coverage in the form of hex pins. So that's one place where it has also been introduced by the FCC. So just going over the process that we have used to aggregate this data, service availability data into hex pins. So the base layer that we've used is the FCC Fabric version 2. So any residential and mixed business locations have been included. For each of these now on different resolutions of the bins, we calculated the total number of BSLs in every hex bin at the different resolution. We then attributed the provider data that was shared at the BSL level. And this was then summarized into the hex bins based on the different speeds and technology types. Lastly, there's also the percentage coverage. So now there could be hexagons where there are unserved as well as unserved locations. So for example, now if I just want to get a sense of how many unserved locations there are within a particular hex bin, that is where we come up with the coverage percentage for each of these different layers, where it's, based, like in this example, it would be number of unserved BSLs upon the total number of BSLs that were identified in the hex bin. That would be used to come up with the percentage coverage. And that's for all the different layers that we have on the map in the form of hex bins. And yes, all of this information can be viewed by clicking on the hex bin for the particular location or layer of interest necessarily. Moving on now, we'll basically have the demo. So I'm going to switch screens. We'll start with the broadband access data and socioeconomic statistics demonstration. We'll go over some of the FCC data that we have incorporated, what's new with the access layers and the technology layers. And we'll just review sort of the provider lookup tool, which was part of the map previously as well. So switching on to the Illinois broadband map here. And please feel free to share your questions in the chat at any point. We'll be getting to them towards the end. So starting off with the access layers, the first layer that we see on here is the broadband serviceable locations. It's grayed out currently because we'll be able to see it when we zoom in. So yeah, when we click on it, this is essentially, again, just so that we do not confuse the state data and the FCC data, what we decided to do with this round of mapping update was just use the FCC data as it is. So we picked up all the different service availability that was reported to the FCC and basically aggregated that and came up with locations that would be classified as unserved, underserved, and served based on the FCC definitions. So the technology that would be considered served would be wireline and licensed fixed wireless based on the BEAD eligibility. And that is what has been used for, representing the green is the served, the yellow is the underserved, and the red locations are the unserved. And this is, again, all based on the FCC data that was released in December 2022. Also, the FCC data keeps updating because they have this challenge process. So this sort of location status is based on data as of June 15th. Also note, so if there have been changes to your location since June 15, they wouldn't be necessarily visible on the map just as yet. So this is a static sort of location data set at this point. Moving on to what access looks like, and I'm going to go back to the home extent here. And how we've categorized these are, again, starting with the wireline layers for the different speeds. Then we have licensed fixed wireless, unlicensed fixed wireless. And then we move on to combining all of these in the all fixed layers for the different speed tiers. So I think for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll probably just look at 100 by 100 symmetric wireline. We'll start with that also because it's sort of aligns with the goal that we have for Connect Illinois. So any project get access to 100 symmetrical. So when you click on the layer, you basically, again, get these hex pins that we had initially described. This is at resolution 6. So this would mean that any hexagon that is covered in the shade of orange here has access. Some locations or all locations in these hex pins have access to symmetrical 100 speeds wireline technology. So now to get more specific, so again, the percentage coverage, we understand that not all the locations in the hex pin might have access to that. So with any of these layers, always click on the cell that you're kind of interested in, and that's going to give you an accurate understanding of how many locations within that hex pin are served. And when we zoom in, it basically takes us to the finer resolution hex pins, which is resolution 9 in this case, which is also where we can click on a specific area of interest and get to know that, okay, in this hex pin, it's just 4% of the BSLs that have access to 100 by 100 wireline service. So that would be true for all the different layers that we have on here. What I'm going to do is also how we try to like use this map, because we have the statistics tab here, which has a bunch of other socioeconomic indicators that could help define, like, why access looks like the way it does in certain areas. So, just maybe look at, I was thinking of looking at Springfield, for example, for the purpose of this tutorial. Using the search bar to type in the location. It could be as specific as an address. If you're interested in finding an address, type in the address into the bar and it's going to take you there. We have the boundary layers here so that, it's more intuitive. You can always turn on the boundary layers. We also have the townships, cities, and villages layer here. But then the map gets a little busy. So it's, yeah. If you want to turn that on, that's an option. And there are a few other like school districts, legislative districts, federal lands, and all of those other layers that might be helpful. So again, looking at like, where we have access to 100 by 100 symmetrical, and we have the legend right here. So you get a sense of what all of those colors on the map really mean. You could look at specific areas of interest. So we have, so you could just like, look at specific areas of interest, like in this case, why exactly in Springfield do we not have access in these particular parts of the city? And then turn on the statistics layer and probably look at income. And there's a legend, the greener shades are the higher income, higher median income households, and the bluer is sort of the lower income. So income could be a factor for why there's lesser access in these areas. Again, not a causal sort of relationship, but just as you're looking at socioeconomic characteristics that might define areas within the city or like, counties that do not have access to like, reliable broadband speeds. So we have a bunch of different indicators there that might be helpful. So there's a lot to explore on that front with this. The other thing I'd recommend is you could certainly turn on multiple layers with this and get a sense of like, where there's overlap. So if I were to look at 100 by 20 wireline and also maybe look at 100 by 20 licensed fixed wireless. So we see it's basically the blue that is the licensed fixed wireless areas, and the orange shows the 100 by 20 wireline. But again, with this, just be careful on like, when you, let's zoom out a little bit. Yeah, when you click on certain locations that do not have a colored hex pin, you'll see 0% served. So just make sure that, you are clicking on the area that is of interest. And if you have multiple layers turned on, just look at the title so that you have an accurate understanding of what the percentage is really representing. Because in this case, it is orange on top, but then it supposedly also has a blue sort of hex pin there because it shows up 100 by 20 licensed fixed wireless. So it has both. So when working with multiple layers, just be careful because there could be overlapping hex pins and could have different coverages because it's talking about different speeds and different technologies. So that's with the access layers. Similarly, we have the technology layers that have been converted into aggregated into the hex pins. So we have cable, DSL, and fiber here. So it's these different colors, the red showing cable, the purple showing DSL, and the browns showing fiber access. Again, this at the state level, it's going to be H6 resolution. And then as we zoom in, we can get a granular understanding of places that have access to all of these different technologies. So there's a lot of cable here. And yeah, as I mentioned, overlapping hex pins. So yeah, when working with multiple layers, again, just make sure that, yeah, you also turn them on and off to just make sure that you're not missing out on any overlapping hex pins. They're not initially visible. And now the provider lookup, which is again pretty much the same. With this one, we could be as sort of like, zoomed out, we could do a city, and it's going to generate a list of providers who have reported service with the different technology and also the maximum speeds that they have identified. So we get a list here. Again, this is provider reported data, and there might be changes all the time with like, service that's actually available and all of that. So we do have a link here, which takes you to the feedback form. So anytime if you're looking up your address on the provider lookup, and if you think that one of these providers does not actually provide the service that they have reported, and yeah, so just let us know through the feedback form here, and it's going to have like just some information about the location that's being challenged, the name and phone number of the challenger, and then specific screenshots that you could add for additional information on what's inaccurately represented in this lookup, essentially. So that covers the first segment of the demonstration, which is the access layers and some of how you can like integrate it with the statistics, which is available through, which is aggregated through the census data. Now moving on to grant eligibility. So again, this would be of interest also because we have a Connect Illinois round 3 that's in running and is accepting applications on a quarterly rolling basis. Also, one thing I wanted to mention, so with some of these boundary layers, so like example, we have county on, we have, again, some additional information, which is right now at a locational level. So this is not based on hex pins, this is based on the actual BSLs that were identified in the county for this example. So it gives you the number of residential locations, how many of them are rural, and then it breaks it down into the different speed tiers, and there's stats on all fixed and also on wireline technologies and how many locations have access to these different technologies and speeds. That's one thing to look out for. Moving on to grant eligibility, yes. So this is where, again, looks like a lot of state is eligible, but again, the idea here is even if, one location in the hex pin is eligible, we want it to show up as red when we turn on this layer, but the key would be then to click on the hex pin to get a sense of how many locations within that hex pin are actually eligible in this case for this layer. So that, and again, zooming in, we'll get a finer granularity at the resolution 9 bins, and we'll see better of like, what are the areas that would be eligible for funding. One way of like looking at locations could be using the broadband serviceable, the broadband serviceable location status data. But with this, the only caveat is going to be this uses BEAD eligibility criteria. That is how it represents served, unserved, and underserved locations. But then the definitions that we have in place for Connect Illinois round 3 are a little bit different because we consider only 100 by 20 wireline to be served. And we do not consider licensed fixed wireless, or just like fixed wireless in our eligibility criteria with round 3. So if you were to look at locations, you could certainly use these two layers together, but they wouldn't necessarily be comparable just because of the difference in eligibility criteria with BEAD and the current round of Connect Illinois, which is round 3. So just wanted to point that out. For folks. So we have this just to get a little bit into what goes into the grant eligibility layer. As I mentioned, it's any area that lacks 100 by 20 wireline. And we also exclude areas that were previously funded through previous rounds of Connect Illinois projects, and also any reconnect or community connect, so like the USDA funding that's available. We also have an RDOF layer here for information. And again, that's a lot of layers turned on together, but depends on what you're really looking for. There could be exceptions to when we would fund an area that already has RDOF funding. So that's why we have this on, and we do not directly incorporate it into the grant eligibility layer. But as you're planning for project proposals or things like that for round 3, definitely utilize this layer to get a sense of whether there has been previous funding in this area or not. And yes, again, at the final resolutions as well, there's going to be the percentage statistics that's available. So definitely, so in this, you wouldn't really have to worry, what part of this Hex Pin is actually eligible, because it's 100%. So any location within the Hex Pin would be eligible for funding, but there could be instances where it's, in this case, 50%. So that is where we could have further discussion if that's needed. The other layers that would pertain to this would be, let me not turn this off. And yeah, just to highlight all of the Connect Illinois funding that has pop-ups where you can get additional information on the project area, what exactly was proposed, and the grant amount and things like that. So that, and also want to highlight the unserved and underserved. So we have named it, and that's available in the Access tab. We have Connect Illinois Round 3 unserved and underserved areas. Again, I'm going to go back here and turn off some of these so that it's easier. Okay. And now going back to the home extend, we have our unserved and underserved layers turned on. Again, just because I think it's an important point, working with Hex Pins, if you have multiple layers turned on, be sure to there could be overlaps. Like in this case, a lot of the purple is on the red layers, just because those Hex Pins have both unserved and underserved locations. So as you click on any of these, you'll get more information. This is about the underserved, and it has 19.08% of the locations in this Hex Pin are categorized as underserved. So yeah, that's going to be that. When you zoom in, it's going to be more granular. And again, we can see there's statistics at both levels for these layers. Yeah, now that we've covered grant eligibility, also moving on to the mapping review layers that some of you might have already interacted with. So the project applications that we received in Q2 of 2023 have been added as a separate layer onto the map. So I'm just going to turn that on. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. This is also a little different from what we had in the first mapping review layer. So if we were to look at it, just take a closer look. We'll see there was quite a little bit of overlap even between adjoining applications. And that was because we had basically used a buffer for creating these project areas. So a buffer along the proposed network by the provider to create these project area boundaries. With this new layer, just to avoid any additional locations that were being encompassed as part of the project area that were not in fact meant to be there, we decided that we're going to use some of the address data that was submitted by providers to us as part of the application to actually carve out these specific polygons, which could look like random shapes, but it helps give a better understanding of the locations that were actually intended to be a part of the application. So hopefully that's going to be helpful in getting a more better sense of what was proposed. And as we're again transitioning to the location data, the hope is, yes, we're working with providers to get the actual fabric location IDs for each of the addresses that fall within their proposed project area, so that we can make that switch where it's all going to be locations and it's going to be sort of an equal comparison moving forward between data sets. So that's the hope. We have talked about Connect Illinois. previous rounds of funding. That data is available. There's also data on the federal program. So let's go back to the home extent, and you could either look at all the FCC commitments. And again, this is a lot of the data for this is available in polygons just because we did not have locational data at this point. The state also is working to identify, like, convert all of this polygon data into BSLs again, just because that is how we're going to be talking about, access with BEAD moving forward. So we're trying to make that transition also for these layers. With this one, you get a sense of funding that's available through ACAM, CAF2, and RDOF, and there's the legend here. For all of these, if you want to look at them separately, then we also have these additional layers separately for each of these programs. I'll have to zoom in to actually get those active, and it's taking a while, I guess. Okay, yes, we see it. So the shaded gray, the hatched gray is basically ACAM. And again, based on the area of interest, you could search and zoom on to that area and look up information for all of these different federal programs as well. A few other tools that I would like to highlight in the demo are basically the query or locate. So we have this by county. If we were to look at just selecting Brown for this, you can rename it. And apply. So it's going to take us there. And it's essentially the stats that comes up with the pop-up. The only good thing I like about the difference with the query tool is if you're focused on a particular county and you query it, you basically get a boundary around it. So that just makes it a different color and easier for visualization, I guess. That would be an added advantage according to me right here. The other important query tool, and then there's query tools available for different boundaries like geographies as well. So, definitely explore that. If you are looking up the mapping review layers, what would be really interesting is querying by, you can do it by provider. If you're interested in, this provider in the state, where have they actually proposed projects, you don't have to select a project, just selecting one of them is good. And you apply, you can rename it if you want to. It gives you all the locations in the state where, in this example, we selected MediaCom, so where they have applied. So you can get all of that information in one go. And on the right here, you'll also get the details. So what's proposed, the grant amount, and the same will be available when you click on a project. So that should be pretty helpful. You can also download export map. So if you've done things onto the map, if you've exported any of your layers on here, you can export that through the feature that's available right here. And one last thing, we also have a few layers for download. The last two are more relevant for now. So we have the grant eligibility shapefile that's available. Again, that's going to be Hex Pins. And then we have the latest mapping review layer that's also available to download on the right here. So that concludes the demonstration that I had planned. We'll go back to the slides. We have a little more content. Before we go on to the BEAD preview, just a few deadlines to a reminder. So we have our feedback for the new mapping review layer due by September 8th, 5 p.m. So please feel free to download that layer, take a look at the map and the different projects proposed. And our next round of next deadline for the Connect Illinois round 3 applications is going to be October 2nd. So yeah, the mapping review process, again, just briefly going over, you might have had a chance to participate previously, but then we have the deadline posted. You can share your response with us at broadband@illinois.gov, and please include the project that you're challenging. And so there's basically more information about it on the Connect Illinois website, how you're supposed to be submitting any feedback about the proposed projects. It should include the project name, any shape files or location specific data that you can share to support your feedback and all of that. That is way to do it. It could be incumbent providers, communities that are impacted by the project, or any other stakeholders who can actually participate in the mapping review. We'd certainly want to know any places where the map is currently showing inaccurate data so that we can rectify it, and everybody knows where there is service and where there's not, and what areas would be eligible. So I'm now going to pass it on to Matt for some information about round 4 speed.
All right, thanks so much, Shabika, and thanks again, everybody, for your questions in the chat, and we look forward to getting to those in a moment. I think one thing that I just wanted to mention here, just regarding what's coming up next with round 4 of Connect Illinois. Again, that will be the round that uses the federal BEAD funding. And as we look at the map right now, the introductions of the Hex Pins, the reflection of the data accordingly, that's something that you're going to see more and more of with the Office of Broadband, with our broadband map. And so get used to that. I know there's been a little bit of a transition this summer in looking at the area-wide polygons and the introduction of the Hex Pins. We want to just make sure that folks get familiar with that, because that is going to likely be the way in which we go about establishing the ways we communicate with stakeholders around unserved and underserved areas of the state approaching round 4 of Connect Illinois. And so in the meantime, I think Shabika had previously mentioned, we do want to be able to rely upon area-wide polygons, and we may be reintroducing that just for comparison of broadband serviceable locations, so that location point data against the broad polygon area that we've had up in the past. But again, the Hex Pins is something that we're not just introducing here over the summer of 2023 just to see how it looks, but rather it is a migration towards that direction. And again, because the Federal Communications Commission and our office in Illinois here, we are collecting data that is specific to the actual location, and we're incorporating that into our map. And so the Hex Pins are a way of relaying that information. Again, if you've got questions, I think it's always a good rule of thumb to zoom in and get a read on how things look as close to your location or your area of interest as possible. So that statewide perspective might not always be the most accurate, might not be the most intuitive in terms of what you might be expecting. So, okay, that's one point I wanted to make, is we're going to see more of this moving forward. And I think as we look to the future here, with the BEAD fund in round 4, it's just good to acknowledge we are in the thick of round 3 of Connect Illinois. And so that mapping review process, the communications that we've had, accepting applications throughout this calendar year at minimum for round 3, that conversation is taking place right now. And I really encourage any potential applicants who are interested in round 4 to provide an application to us expressing your interests, your ideas for round 3. It's a good way for us to get to know each other, for you to get aware of and familiar with the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. And then as we move towards round 4, there's a whole host of opportunities for providing feedback. And so we'll have formal open comment or public comment periods that'll likely stretch in the month of September, as well as a mapping challenge process that we're required to administer by NTIA that will help us get even better, I think, accuracy with our current maps and the mapping that we'll be held accountable to with round 4 of Connect Illinois. Again, that BEAD funded round. And so again, our obligation, by the time the last BEAD dollar is spent, we will have extended access to every last unserved location within Illinois, broadband serviceable location. And so again, as Shabika had mentioned earlier today, we're starting to introduce those data sets, those layers into our mapping. And so this summer, it might seem like, hey, this looks new. There's more here than we've seen in the past. We want to just reassure you that this is intended to be a thoughtful transition from where we were to where we need to go in terms of how we're capturing data and relaying that to stakeholders. But if you've got any questions along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. Mapping is something that we spend a lot of time on. We take great pride in collecting data and trying to relay it accurately and accessibly to stakeholders throughout the state. But that's not to say that we can't continue to make improvements. So let us know if you've got any recommendations. Happy to follow up offline if that would be helpful for you or your community or your group. And so the take-home messages, you're going to see more hex pins. You're going to see more location point data in our maps. We're going to try to reintegrate some of the area-wide polygons where we can, just as a point of reference, some familiarity from previous versions of our map. And also there's going to be a lot more public engagement opportunity for providing feedback on our planning, our proposed approach to use of BEAD funds. And I think it's important, I mentioned this at the outset, for those who want to lean into mapping, for us to be able to support resources for you outside of a typical kind of webinar cadence. And so look for more information on that front as well. I know that Shabik had dropped this in the chat box earlier. Again, our bi-weekly newsletter, a great source of information for folks to stay up to speed with what we're doing, as well as our Connect Illinois website. Visit those early and often in the months and weeks ahead, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities for providing feedback, for seeing the updates to the map, and of course, for taking advantage not only of our Connect Illinois grant program, round 3 now, round 4 in the year ahead, but also an increasing amount of digital equity offerings. We've got our Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter grant program open right now, accepting applications through September 1 and perhaps beyond. So with that said, I'll pass the mic back to Shabika and Nancy, and we can jump into some questions here.
Sure, thanks, Matt. Nancy, have you been tracking the chat? And if you can share questions with us, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a healthy amount of questions that were put into the chat during Shabika's presentation. Have one question here. Who has mapped whether there is more than one ISP available at a specific location? Hasn't lack of competition been responsible for the US being more expensive than other industrialized nations? Shabika, if you want to try to handle that one there.
Sure, that's a great question. And I think that's, thank you for flagging that for us. We initially had a layer on the map which showed the number of the density of providers at each location. So certainly we have that information from all the data that we collect. That's a really good flag. We would like to bring that back onto the map, showing the density of providers, the number of providers at each location. So we can certainly have that information made available pretty soon. Thank you.
Yeah, and regarding the second part of that question, I think competition might be one piece of the equation, but also regulation. Broadband provision is relatively unregulated in the United States compared to some other countries, and so I think there's a mix of different contributing factors. But I think the point here is more than ever, we are going to be tracking affordability. It's something that we need to take very seriously. We want to take very seriously, not only for the use of round 4 BEAD funds, but also in our current programming, tapping federal capital projects funds. So affordability, access to affordable high performance broadband options, incredibly important and something that we'll be emphasizing more than ever moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. Next question, how do we work with companies, internet service providers, who won't share their fiber network information as they classify that as proprietary?
Nancy, I can take that on. Fiber assets tend to be held as proprietary information by not only private providers, but others. And so I think if you're a local government, a community, a smaller provider, and you're interested in leveraging existing assets, because that is a value that is inherent to our grant programming, we'd like to help you. And so if there's, whether it's the Illinois Century Network, 2,100 miles of open access fiber throughout the state that's available to you. Otherwise, there are other resources that we can help identify and put you in touch with, or perhaps broker a conversation with the asset owner. We'd be happy to play a helpful role if we can. And so I think it's always good for communities as you're thinking about broadband expansion. You look at your needs, you set a vision, reach out to the providers, not only in your community, but in the general area. I think you can learn a lot in terms of what's out there, what's planned. And if you've got any questions, of course, we've got resources like our broadband map that can help confirm what you might be hearing. And also we'd be happy to play a more direct role in brokering conversations.
Thank you. Have a question from someone who says they filed a BDC and 477, wondering why their maps would not match the FCC.
Shabika, you want to take that?
So if you've submitted data to the BDC, that's essentially submitting data to the FCC. They had their data collection period on until September last year, and they had their revised maps come out in December 2022. So that's the latest we have from the FCC maps. So, I'm sorry. The latest maps were released in June 2023, but they are from data that was collected between September and December of 2022. Yes. So if you share data with the BDC, that should be reflected on the FCC maps right now. And if it was during that September to December period, it should show up. The state has a separate outreach for, their provider data. So we reached out to providers March until May of this year to actually update to the new map. If you have participated, we should certainly have it. If you see inaccuracies in how your data is represented, please again reach out to us at broadband@illinois.gov. And again, please feel free to share like shape files or KMZ files that represent, if there's an update to your service area, we'll be happy to work with you and incorporate that into the maps. I hope that's helpful.
And then we have a question about if the construction season information is on those maps. I saw the last date stamp there was May 31. Not sure if that reflects completed infrastructure or related access data, but Shabika, if you want to answer that.
So the data that we request is usually areas where you already provide service. So like it's available right now. That is the data that we collect. So if there's something under construction, we wouldn't include that until it's actually ready for service, other than the grant programs where we have actually given out grants so that providers can start building and meet the promised speed goals that they had proposed. So yeah, it's basically areas that already provide service at those levels reported.
Okay, next question is, should we define underserved as a location where only one ISP is available and the infrastructure is owned privately, thus prohibiting competition versus open access?
Yeah, this is, I think a lot of states are tackling the question as to how you identify unserved or underserved in your area or your state. What we've done with Connect Illinois is we've tried to track the Federal Communications Commission benchmarks for broadband, and so the benchmark for basic broadband is 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload, which on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic seems woefully inappropriate and weak, but nonetheless, that is the standard right now. And so the FCC is deliberating, updating that. Likely will happen. That being said, we look at 100 by 20 megabits per second, so 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload from the get-go has been our threshold for eligibility for a Connect Illinois grant. And I think this was, before the pandemic, before increased reliance upon, working from home or distance learning or opportunities in telehealth. Certainly when you think of the Internet of Things and multiple devices connected to a local network all at once, you want to make sure you've got both download and upload speeds. So we've used that 100 by 20 marker, and we're going to very likely stick with that as our basic gating threshold for eligibility to Connect Illinois funding. That's been the case with rounds 1, 2, and 3 for Connect Illinois, and that's what we plan to do with round 4 of Connect Illinois. I think the program that we've set up, the approach that we've made based upon best practices around the country, likely will be applying a lot of that thought, a lot of of that approach into round 4 of Connect Illinois, which we can get into in more detail. But I think it is incredibly important for us to be not only taking into account affordability, but also, I think, choice. And when you look at a local area, you want to make sure that homes and businesses and farms and other anchor institutions, folks around the state, have access to high performance, affordable, quality broadband. And in many cases, it's complementary options that are really going to put a community and a family in a position to compete in the years ahead. So competition, choice, affordability, all things that we take seriously.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Question on, is the summary data available at the township level?
So because we've transitioned to representing data at the Hex Pins for now, we only have that summary information at the county level. We can certainly work with, specific counties if they're looking at the township level for now. If they need it immediately, we can try and work that out. But right now we have it for counties and we have it aggregated in Hex Pins. Yeah, we can make it available for counties if you have like specific data needs around aggregation at the township levels.
Okay, looks like the next question on here asks if a primary reason that the internet may be unaffordable is because of the lack of choice. Does ACP reinforce this lack of choice by providing subsidies to incumbent ISPs who are the only provider in a specific geography, whilst not promoting competition via open access?
Well, let me just kind of tackle the ACP. So that's the Affordable Connectivity Program, which has helped make existing broadband service plans more affordable to more Americans. And that's certainly the case here in Illinois. First of all, we want to see this program continue because we think that making sure that broadband is affordable to households is absolutely important. ACP also gets at another element of this discussion, and that's like the operating costs of maintaining a network and making sure that when you build out in an area or you make upgrades to your network, that you can expect to have subscribers, customers, that you're going to have revenue coming in to maintain. And so I think the ACP can add value not only to getting more Illinoisans subscribed to internet at home, but also I think it can help our provider community and perhaps the competitive profile around the state help incumbents maintain their networks, make upgrades, and perhaps help new entrants to a market look at an area as more competitive and more attractive than it might otherwise have been. And so we're hopeful, I think, first of all, that ACP is out there to help households, because that's really what we want to do, make broadband that's out there available right now more affordable to more Illinoisans. But I definitely think that it can have kind of some, if you want to call it upstream benefits in the competitive landscape that I think would be beneficial for really a lot of stakeholders, homes, businesses throughout the state as well.
When do you anticipate round 4 to start accepting applications? You knew this question was coming.
Yeah. So about a year ago, so I think last June, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, this is June of 2022, put out its notice of funding opportunity for their programs, the BEAD, Digital Equity, and then the Middle Mile programs. And so what we see happening here in the year ahead, a lot of engagement, a lot of planning, that mapping work that we talked about will be happening throughout the calendar year. And we will be submitting what's called an initial proposal. It's currently due December 27th, and that's going to outline our general approach for how we want to make use of our $1 billion of BEAD funds. And that approach needs to be, that initial proposal needs to be reviewed and accepted and approved by NTIA. And that could happen at any point in the first quarter of the next calendar year, or perhaps in late spring of next year. We don't know for sure. So there's a little bit of unknown here. We know the sequencing. We don't know all of the deadlines. We don't know all of the dates. But what we do expect is that round 4 of Connect Illinois will open in 2024, and that it will be backed by BEAD funding, and that we hope to establish as many connections between round 4 that's backed by BEAD and round 3 and what's preceded it as possible, so that, broadband providers, local communities, other stakeholders who've been following what we're doing can look to the past and anticipate the future. I think familiarity is going to help us a lot in Illinois. It's going to help us get the BEAD opportunity right. And so we want to maintain consistency wherever we can. And so I think you look at what we've done with round 3 here, the waves of applications, the ongoing kind of merit and mapping review, the conversational approach that we've taken with providers and other applicants in our communities. I want to try to maintain as much of that as we can in round 4. But we're not in a position where we're submitting our initial proposal quite yet. To the contrary, we're just preparing to put out some of those ideas for public comment in the month of September, and then we'll be incorporating comment, finalizing our initial proposal, and then getting feedback off of that from NTIA before we open round 4 of Connect Illinois with those BEAD funds, probably sometime late first quarter, early second quarter of calendar year 2024. A lot of answer there. Hopefully I got to your question.
Yes, and I think the other questions that go with it possibly as well, wanting to know differences between round 3 and 4, and also if the match component is continued in round 4 as well.
Yeah, the match piece is required by NTIA. And so a 25% match is the default. We can make exceptions to that. And so right now, through the mapping and through our own understanding of the market, we'll be anticipating what round 4 will produce. But the rule of thumb is you need at least a 25%, we call it a non-state match, but match from an applicant, whether it's a provider, a local community, a local government, what have you.
And a question regarding when the round 3 awards may be announced.
They're imminent. And so we've made great progress over the summer with our mapping review process. Our merit review process has made great progress as well. Just to kind of level set with folks, we have 170 applications, 170, seeking about $1.1 billion of round 3 funding right now. And with that, we've, I think, inspired approximately 160 mapping review challenges or inquiries, if you will. And so we really try to deal with those on a case-by-case basis in terms of like having conversations with the entity providing the feedback, circling back to our applicants and getting it right in terms of the projects that we fund and the extent to which we fund them. And so an announcement is imminent. I'll leave it at that. I would certainly expect by the next time we do one of these webinars, we'll be able to look back and talk about some of the projects that were funded. And so I think a lot of our applicants, we're in regular conversation right now about that. If you got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Best way of reaching us, again, broadband@illinois.gov.
Great. We have a question asking if a provider has limited their packages available, forcing people getting state and federal broadband grants to either have a bare bones plan with very low data cap or pay for their 1 gigabits per second top level plan. How do we report on that or pass that info on to the right stakeholders? And for clarity, adding here, they are only cable speeds provider. So once again, can't just go to a competing provider and get comparable access.
Yeah,
So
yeah, real quick.
I think
feel
maybe
like
you
we're
understand
entering
that.
the lightning round here. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I think on this question, I would just say, first of all, if you've got any issues regarding your current service, if there are, advertisements versus experienced realities, let us know. We want to hear about that. It's something that will continue, I think, through formal structures to collect feedback on. Secondly, just any entity that receives a Connect Illinois grant cannot apply data caps. And so we really want to put our communities in a position where what is advertised is what is experienced. We know that sometimes that's not always as easy as it's said, but we really believe high quality, high performing, affordable broadband needs to be available to all. And that means that you shouldn't have to read the fine print to know what your monthly bill is going to be. And so there are some good reasons why data caps are in place, but with round 3 grants and certainly with BEAD funding coming down the pike, data caps are not something that we'll be allowing with our grant funded work.
Well, it's 12:59 and I see no more questions, so I get to selfishly ask one myself. The mapping tools have been so key for counties and communities. What do you want to see if you saw a perfect county and a community just perfectly applying the use of these maps in their planning? What would that look like?
Well, I want to give my colleague Shubika a chance to answer that question. Before I pass the mic to her, though, I mean, I just really think that this is a great tool for folks to understand, and it has been iterative. I mean, we've put stuff up, taken it down. We're introducing obviously more point data, the broadband serviceable locations. We want to make this a tool that's helpful not only for applicants to the Connect Illinois grant program, but stakeholders across Illinois that want to better understand the digital divide and perhaps future digital equity grant programming that might be available to them. And so with that said, Shubika, anything specific that you would like to flag here?
Sure. I think what I'd say is it can be a really good tool in like building that narrative, just because we have all of those different social, and it's basically all of this information is through different sources out there, but the Illinois broadband map essentially brings it all together so that when you're thinking about these projects, you have pretty much all the information you need to make those initial decisions and just get the narrative right. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this in specific areas? That can be really helpful. Getting a sense of where there's already funding that's, through federal or state sources, if that's available, and then how you might want to tweak your project areas based on that. Or maybe like for communities who are engaging with this, just maybe looking at people who are already working in your area, and if there's like a specific area within your county that needs access, maybe working with providers who already provide access in other areas within the county or things like that. So just getting a sense of who's already there, who we can reach out to, and just building that narrative and looking up areas that are eligible. So yeah, all of that different layers all put together can really help put together a proposal and get a better sense of what is happening, what should be happening, who to reach out to, and how we can make it all happen. So yeah.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, everyone.
Well, many thanks for both of your time today. We are grateful, and any questions, you'll be able to contact Shubika and Matt at the email listed, and we're very grateful. We hope you all have a great rest of your week, and thanks for joining us.